She thought he was just another homeless man, someone to dismiss, someone who didn't belong. But when the truth about who he really was came out, her world flipped upside down. What happens when a single moment of judgment reveals a shocking secret? Stick around. This story will leave you speechless. Where are you watching from? Comment below and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will leave you inspired. The lunch rush was in full swing, the clatter of plates and the sizzle of frying pans merging into a chaotic symphony. Anna moved swiftly through the crowded restaurant, her apron weighed down by the pens, receipts, and loose change she stuffed into its pockets. Her fake smile barely hid the frustration brewing underneath. A loud laugh escaped her as she passed the counter, her voice cutting through the noise. "Hey, look who just strolled in," she said, nodding toward a man sitting near the window. He was hunched over, wearing layers of mismatched clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His hair, streaked with gray, curled wildly around his face, and his shoes were so worn that his socks peeked through the seams. Laura, her co-worker, glanced up briefly and shrugged. "Another one of those I'm just here to sit types," she muttered, balancing 3 plates on her arm. "Probably just wants free coffee." Anna smirked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Not on my shift." As she approached his table, the man didn't even look up. His hands rested lightly on the table, calloused and rough, as though they'd worked harder than most people could imagine. A sense of calm surrounded him, and it irritated her. "Excuse me," she said, her voice laced with impatience. "This isn't a place for loitering. If you're not ordering anything, you can't sit here." The man finally raised his head, his eyes a striking shade of blue that seemed out of place on his weathered face. They met hers, and for a moment Anna felt a pang of unease she couldn't explain. But he smiled, just slightly, as though her rudeness amused him. "Sometimes it's nice just to sit and take in the world," he said quietly. His voice was steady, calm, and surprisingly warm. Anna folded her arms. "Well, this isn't a park bench. You either order something or move along." He tilted his head, studying her as though she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "What would you recommend then?" Her tone turned sharper, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Are you serious? You're wasting my time. Either order or leave." For a long moment he didn't respond, his gaze unwavering. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a single crumpled bill, setting it on the table. "A cup of coffee, please," he said simply. Anna snatched the money without a word and stormed back to the counter, muttering to Laura, "Unbelievable. People like him think the world owes them something." Laura glanced at the man again. "Maybe he's just trying to get warm. He's not hurting anyone, Anna." Anna waved her off, pouring the coffee in a huff. "Warmth isn't free." When she returned to the table, the man accepted the coffee with a nod. "Thank you," he said, his voice still calm. "It's nice to see people working so hard. You must be good at what you do." His words caught her off guard, but she quickly brushed them aside. "Yeah, well, hard work doesn't pay itself," she said coldly, before turning on her heel and walking away. From behind the counter, Laura watched the exchange, shaking her head. "You didn't have to be that harsh." Anna shrugged. "He's just another drifter. It's not like he's going to remember me." But as the man sipped his coffee, his gaze lingered on the busy restaurant, his expression unreadable. He observed every corner of the room, the staff, the customers, the details of the worn wooden tables and the faded menu board. There was a quiet certainty about him, as though he already knew more about the place than anyone else in it. Anna, meanwhile, moved on with her day, thinking nothing of the man she had dismissed. What she didn't notice was how his eyes lingered on her, not with anger or judgment, but with an odd sense of knowing, as though he was already piecing together a story she hadn't yet realized she was a part of. The lunch rush waned, leaving the restaurant quieter but still buzzing with scattered conversations. Anna leaned against the counter, massaging her temples as the stress of the shift began to ease. She glanced at the man near the window, surprised to see him still nursing his coffee. His presence lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake, his calm demeanor a strange contrast to the chaos she had just endured. "Is he still here?" Laura asked, wiping down a table nearby. She tilted her head toward the man. Doesn't seem like he's in a hurry to leave. Anna sighed, rolling her eyes. Guess he's getting his money's worth out of that one cup of coffee. Laura paused, her cloth stilling on the table. Or maybe he doesn't have anywhere else to go. That's not my problem, Anna shot back, grabbing an empty tray. We're not a charity, Laura. If we let one person like him stick around, we'll be flooded with them by next week. Laura frowned but didn't reply. Instead, she watched as the man shifted in his seat, gazing out the window. There was something about him that struck her as unusual, not in the way he looked, but in the way he seemed so entirely unbothered by his surroundings. He wasn't begging or drawing attention to himself. He simply existed, quietly observing. Meanwhile, at the other end of the restaurant, the busboy, Eddie, struggled to stack a towering pile of dirty dishes onto his cart. The plates clinked precariously, threatening to topple over at any second. Michael, the man at the window, noticed and stood up, walking over without hesitation. Careful there, Michael said, his voice steady. He reached out and grabbed the top plate just as it started to slide. Eddie blinked, startled, but quickly nodded in gratitude. Thanks, Eddie mumbled, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. He glanced around, hoping no one had noticed his near mistake. I thought I had it. Michael smiled faintly, setting the plate back onto the cart. You're doing fine, just a little balance. It's all about balance. Eddie offered a shy smile in return and pushed the cart toward the kitchen. Anna, who had been watching from the counter, shook her head. What's he doing now? Playing Good Samaritan? Laura, still wiping down tables, raised an eyebrow. Maybe he's just being nice. You could try that sometime. Before Anna could retort, the restaurant door swung open, and a regular customer, Mr. Halpern, stepped inside. He was a gruff man in his 60s, always quick to complain if something wasn't to his liking. Today he seemed particularly impatient. Anna, he barked, waving her over as he settled into his usual booth. You gonna stand there all day, or are you taking orders? With a forced smile, Anna grabbed her notepad and hurried over. Good afternoon, Mr. Halpern. What can I get for you today? The usual. And make it quick, he snapped, tapping his fingers on the table. As she scribbled down his order, Anna could feel Michael's eyes on her from across the room. It was subtle, but she couldn't shake the sense that he was paying attention to everything, even this exchange. It annoyed her, though she couldn't say why. By the time she returned to the counter, Laura was smirking. You're a ray of sunshine today, Anna groaned. You try dealing with Halpern without losing your mind. I think you've already lost it, Laura teased, nodding toward Michael, who had returned to his seat. Maybe you should take a page out of his book, calm, quiet, not letting the world bother him. Anna snorted. Yeah, well, that's easy when you've got nothing to lose. But Laura's words stuck with her more than she cared to admit. As the day went on, she caught herself glancing at Michael, still baffled by his calm presence. She wanted to dismiss him, but something about the way he carried himself felt intentional, like he was here for a reason. Near the end of her shift, as the last few tables emptied, Anna noticed Michael pulling something from his pocket, a small, battered notebook. He opened it and began to write, his pen moving with deliberate precision. For a moment, curiosity tugged at her. What could someone like him possibly be writing about? She shook her head and turned away, brushing the thought aside. But deep down, a strange feeling lingered. A sense that this wasn't the last time she'd be crossing paths with the quiet man by the window. The evening lull settled over the restaurant, the hum of the kitchen fading to a distant clatter of dishes. Most of the tables had been cleared, leaving only a handful of diners finishing their meals. Anna leaned against the counter, counting the minutes until her shift ended. She glanced toward the window where Michael still sat, his notebook open in front of him. The sight of him writing piqued her curiosity again, though she tried to suppress it. Laura approached, nudging Anna with her elbow. He's still here, must be setting some kind of record. Anna rolled her eyes. Maybe he's writing a manifesto on how to get free coffee. Laura chuckled, but then grew serious. You really don't think it's strange? The guy's been sitting here for hours, just watching, writing. It's like he's studying us." Anna shrugged, though her discomfort was growing. "Whatever. As long as he doesn't cause trouble, I don't care." Just then, Michael closed his notebook and stood, tucking it into his jacket pocket. He walked toward the counter, his steps deliberate but unhurried. Anna straightened instinctively, a wave of irritation rising as she prepared for whatever he was about to say. "Excuse me," Michael began, his voice calm but firm. "Could I trouble you for a glass of water?" Anna sighed and grabbed a glass, filling it from the tap with sharp, jerking movements. "Here," she said, sliding it across the counter without meeting his gaze. Michael took the glass, his hand brushing the edge of the counter. "Thank you," he said, his tone sincere. "You've had a busy day." Anna froze for a moment, caught off guard by the simplicity of his comment. She glanced up, meeting his eyes. There was no judgment in his expression, no trace of mockery, just a quiet acknowledgement of her exhaustion. It unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. "Yeah, well, that's the job," she replied, her voice more defensive than she intended. Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a sip of the water and looked around the restaurant. "You run a tight ship here," he said finally. "It's impressive." Anna furrowed her brow, unsure if he was being sarcastic. "What do you know about it?" Michael smiled faintly. "More than you might think." He set the glass down gently. "Hard work is underrated these days, but it's not just about working hard. It's about working with heart." Anna blinked, caught off guard by the weight of his words. Before she could respond, he gave her a small nod and turned to leave, his calm stride carrying him toward the door. She watched him go, a strange mix of irritation and curiosity bubbling inside her. "Working with heart?" she muttered under her breath. "What does that even mean?" Laura appeared beside her, having caught the tail end of the conversation. "You know," she said, smirking, "for someone who annoys you so much, you sure keep looking at him." Anna shot her a glare. He's just weird, okay? Who sits in a restaurant all day and talks like some kind of philosopher?" "Maybe he's a philosopher," Laura teased. "Or a writer. Or, who knows, a spy." Anna shook her head, brushing off the comment. But as she cleared the counter, she noticed something on the stool where Michael had been sitting. A single folded piece of paper lay there, crisp against the worn leather seat. Frowning, she picked it up and unfolded it. Inside, written in precise looping handwriting, were just a few words. "Kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything." Her grip tightened on the paper as her chest tightened with a mix of embarrassment and confusion. Why would he leave this? Was it meant for her? For the restaurant? She couldn't tell, but something about it nagged at her, stirring a discomfort she didn't want to admit. She stuffed the note into her pocket, resolving to forget about it. But as she finished her shift and walked home that evening, her thoughts kept circling back to the man with the quiet eyes and the cryptic words, wondering what, exactly, his game was, and why she couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more about her than he let on. The next morning, the restaurant opened to the usual rush of breakfast regulars, hurried professionals grabbing coffee to go, retirees lingering over eggs and toast, and the occasional family wrangling children before school. Anna arrived early, her mind still lingering on the note from the previous day. She hadn't told anyone about it, not even Laura. Instead, she had tucked it into her bedside drawer, unsure why she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. As she tied her apron and began prepping the tables, she caught herself glancing toward the window where Michael had sat. The stool was empty, of course, but the memory of his calm presence made her uneasy. She shook her head and muttered under her breath, "Get a grip, Anna. He's just some guy." The morning rush picked up quickly, leaving no time for idle thoughts. Anna moved with practiced efficiency, balancing plates and navigating the crowded aisles. She was in the middle of refilling coffee for a regular when she heard the door chime. Glancing up, she froze. Michael had returned. He looked much the same as he had the day before, disheveled, his jacket slightly too big for his lean frame. But today, There was something different about him. He carried a small canvas bag slung over one shoulder, and his gaze seemed sharper, more purposeful. "Seriously?" Anna muttered under her breath. She quickly turned back to her customer, forcing a smile as she poured their coffee. "Anything else I can get for you?" The customer shook their head, and Anna made her way to the counter, keeping an eye on Michael as he settled into a different table, one closer to the kitchen. He didn't pull out his notebook this time. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, watching the room with quiet intensity. Laura sidled up beside her, balancing a tray of dirty dishes. Well, look who's back." "Don't start," Anna said, grabbing a stack of menus. "Maybe he's just here for another coffee. Or maybe he likes the atmosphere," Laura teased, smirking. "You know, you should ask him why he's really here. Get some answers." Anna snorted. "Yeah, right. Like I have time for that." But despite her protest, she couldn't help the way her curiosity gnawed at her. As the morning wore on, she found herself stealing glances at Michael, trying to decipher his presence. He didn't cause any trouble, didn't make any demands. If anything, he seemed to blend into the background, quietly observing the ebb and flow of the restaurant. By mid-morning, Anna's curiosity got the better of her. She approached his table, her expression carefully neutral. "Back again?" she said, her tone laced with skepticism. "You must really like the coffee here." Michael looked up at her, his blue eyes as calm as ever. "The coffee's good," he said simply, "but I came for something else." Anna raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "Oh yeah? And what's that?" For a moment he didn't answer. He glanced around the restaurant, taking in the busy staff, the clinking dishes, the faint hum of conversation. Then he looked back at her. "Perspective," he said. "It's fascinating how much you can learn by just watching people." Anna frowned, unsure how to respond. "Watching people, huh? Sounds creepy." Michael chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Not in the way you think. People reveal a lot about themselves when they're not paying attention. How they treat others, how they handle stress, what they value. It's all there if you look closely enough." Anna shifted uncomfortably, feeling like his words were aimed directly at her. "Well, maybe you should write a book about it," she said, trying to deflect. "Maybe I will," Michael replied, his tone light but his gaze steady. "But for now, I'm just here to enjoy the atmosphere." Before Anna could respond, a loud crash came from the kitchen. Eddie, the busboy, had dropped a tray of glasses, the shards scattering across the floor. The commotion drew everyone's attention, and Anna sighed, already dreading the cleanup. "Eddie," she called, striding toward the kitchen. "What happened?" "I'm sorry," Eddie stammered, crouching to gather the broken pieces. "It slipped. I didn't mean to." "Leave it," Anna snapped, grabbing a broom. "You'll just make it worse." As she swept up the glass, she felt Michael's gaze on her again. She glanced up and saw him watching from his seat, his expression unreadable. Something about his calmness irritated her even more. What right did he have to sit there, passing silent judgment on her every move? By the time the mess was cleaned, Anna's mood had soured further. She didn't have time for cryptic strangers or philosophical musings. But as she passed Michael's table on her way back to the counter, he spoke again, his voice low but deliberate. "You're good at taking charge," he said. "But sometimes, letting people figure things out on their own is the better lesson." Anna froze mid-step, her jaw tightening. She turned to face him, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "And what would you know about running a restaurant?" she snapped. "Sitting around and watching doesn't make you an expert." Michael met her glare without flinching. "You're right," he said, his tone calm but firm. "But I've seen enough to know that leadership isn't just about control. It's about trust." His words hung in the air, heavy and pointed. For a moment, Anna couldn't think of a response. She opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, a customer called for her attention, pulling her away. As she walked back to the counter, her mind raced with thoughts she couldn't quite pin down. Michael's words echoed in her head, unsettling and strangely familiar. She didn't like the way they made her feel, like he had seen something in her she wasn't ready to admit. The rest of Anna's shift passed in a blur of orders, clattering dishes and sharp-edged interactions. She tried to focus on the rhythm of her work, but Michael's words lingered like a splinter she couldn't dislodge. Leadership isn't just about control, it's about trust. What did he mean by that? What gave him the right to lecture her about anything, let alone how to do her job? The frustration gnawed at her, but beneath it, something else stirred, an uneasy sense that he might be right. As the afternoon lull settled in, Michael remained seated, sipping his coffee with the same quiet composure. He hadn't asked for a refill or engaged anyone else in conversation. He just sat there, like he was waiting for something or someone. "Doesn't he have anywhere else to be?" Anna muttered under her breath, watching him from behind the counter. Laura glanced over, smirking. "Maybe he's a guardian angel?" she joked, tossing a clean rag onto the counter. "Here to guide you toward the path of enlightenment." Anna shot her a glare. "If he's my guardian angel, he's doing a lousy job." Before Laura could respond, the bell above the door jingled, and a new customer walked in, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit, his polished shoes clicking against the worn tiles. He scanned the room briefly before heading to the counter. Anna straightened instinctively, her professional mask slipping into place. "Good afternoon," the man said, his voice crisp but polite. "I'm looking for someone named Michael. Would you happen to know if he's here?" The question caught Anna off guard. She hesitated, glancing toward the window where Michael sat. He had noticed the man's arrival and was now watching the interaction with quiet interest. Yeah, he's here," Anna said finally, nodding toward the table. "That's him over there." The man turned, his expression shifting into something almost reverent as he spotted Michael. Without another word, he strode toward the table, his movements purposeful and precise. Anna watched. Her curiosity piqued despite herself. The man stopped in front of Michael's table, inclining his head slightly. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone respectful. "It's good to see you again." Anna blinked. "Mr. Carter?" Michael gestured for the man to sit, his demeanor unchanged. "It's been a while, James," he said simply. "How's the Chicago location coming along?" "Steady progress, sir," James replied, taking the offered seat. "We've hit a few snags with the permits, but nothing we can't handle. I wanted to update you in person before moving forward." Anna's stomach tightened as she listened, confusion and disbelief swirling in equal measure. "Chicago location? Permits? What is going on?" She leaned closer to Laura, whispering, "Did he just call him sir?" Laura looked just as bewildered. "I think he did. Who the hell is this guy?" Their hushed conversation was interrupted as James rose from the table, placing a small leather folder in front of Michael. "The updated figures are in here," he said. "Let me know if you need anything else." Michael nodded, slipping the folder into his bag. "Thank you, James. I'll be in touch." As James turned to leave, Anna couldn't help herself. She stepped forward, her voice sharp with curiosity. "Excuse me," she said, addressing James. "What's this all about? Who is he?" James glanced at her, his expression polite but guarded. "Mr. Carter is the owner," he said simply, "of this restaurant and several others." Anna's breath caught. She stood frozen, the weight of his words crashing over her. "Owner?" She turned to Michael, who was now watching her with an expression that was neither smug nor amused, just calm, as though he had been expecting this moment all along. "You," Anna stammered, her voice faltering. "You're the owner?" Michael tilted his head slightly, his expression softening. "I prefer to think of myself as a caretaker," he said. "The restaurants may have my name on the paperwork, but they belong to the people who bring them to life every day." Anna's mind raced, replaying every interaction she'd had with him over the past 2 days. The cryptic comments, the quiet observations, the way he seemed to know so much about the restaurant without ever asking. It all made sense now, but it also made her feel like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "You were testing us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael didn't deny it. Sometimes you learn the most about people when they think no one important is watching. His words struck like a hammer, and Anna's face burned with shame as she remembered how she had treated him. The sharp comments, the dismissive tone, the utter lack of compassion. He had seen it all, and now she knew he hadn't just been some aimless drifter. He had been watching, waiting, and silently judging. Laura, standing beside her, looked equally stunned. "So, what happens now?" she asked hesitantly. Michael's gaze softened, and for the first time there was a hint of warmth in his expression. "Now," he said, "we see if anyone's willing to change." Without another word, he stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder. He nodded politely to both women before heading toward the door, leaving them standing in stunned silence. Anna felt her chest tighten as he disappeared into the street. Change? Could she change? And more importantly, did she even deserve the chance? For the first time in a long time, she didn't have an answer. The restaurant felt different in Michael's absence. The chatter of customers and the hum of the kitchen continued as usual. But to Anna, everything seemed sharper, louder, more exposed. She moved through her tasks on autopilot, her thoughts spinning in a loop. He was the owner. He saw everything. He knows exactly who I am and what I've done. Laura broke the silence as they cleaned up after the lunch rush. "So, what do we do now?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost uncertain. "Do we just pretend that didn't happen?" Anna frowned, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn stain on the counter. "What are you talking about?" Laura gave her a pointed look. "You know what I'm talking about. Michael, or Mr. Carter, or whatever we're supposed to call him, wasn't just watching us. He was watching you." The words hit harder than Anna wanted to admit. She straightened, tossing the rag into the sink. "I didn't know who he was," she snapped. "How was I supposed to act differently?" "Maybe you shouldn't have to know who someone is to act decent," Laura said, her tone soft but firm. "Ever think about that?" Anna opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. Laura's point hit too close to home, and deep down, Anna knew she was right. But admitting it felt like swallowing glass. As the hours dragged on, the memory of Michael's calm, piercing gaze haunted her. She replayed their conversations over and over, his words echoing in her mind. Sometimes you learn the most about people when they think no one important is watching. By the time Anna's shift ended, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the street in hues of orange and pink. She untied her apron and stepped outside, the crisp evening air biting at her skin. Her feet ached, and her chest felt heavy with the weight of the day. As she turned the corner toward her apartment, a familiar figure caught her eye. Michael was sitting on a bench near the bus stop, his canvas bag resting at his feet. He wasn't writing this time. He simply sat there, watching the world pass by. Anna hesitated, her first instinct to keep walking. But something stopped her. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that she owed him something, even if she didn't know what. Before she could change her mind, she crossed the street and approached the bench. Michael looked up as she neared, his expression as calm and unreadable as ever. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. Michael gestured to the empty space beside him. "It's a free bench." Anna sat, the silence between them stretching long enough to feel uncomfortable. She stared at her hands, unsure how to begin. Finally, she blurted out, "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Michael tilted his head slightly, considering her question. Would it have made a difference? She frowned, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. "Of course it would have. I wouldn't have." She trailed off, her voice faltering. "Wouldn't have what?" Michael asked gently. "Wouldn't have been dismissive, impatient, rude?" The bluntness of his words stung, but Anna didn't argue. She couldn't. Instead, she slumped forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "I didn't mean to act like that. I've just been dealing with a lot." Michael's gaze softened, though his voice remained steady. "Everyone's dealing with something, Anna. That doesn't excuse how we treat others." She winced, his words cutting through her defenses. "I know," she said quietly. "I guess I just—" She paused, struggling to find the right words. "I don't want to be this person, the one who snaps at people who doesn't care. But it's hard. It feels like no matter how hard I work, I'm stuck, like it doesn't matter." Michael nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I've felt that way too. More times than I can count." Anna turned to him, surprised. "You? But you own everything." Michael chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I didn't start that way. When I was young, I worked in restaurants just like this one. Long hours, low pay, rude customers. I know what it feels like to think the world's against you." He paused, his gaze distant as if recalling a memory. "But I also learned that your circumstances don't define you. Your choices do. How you treat people when no one's looking, when you think it doesn't matter. That's what defines who you are." Anna swallowed hard, his words hitting closer to home than she wanted to admit. She thought of Eddie and the broken glasses, of Laura's gentle nudges toward kindness, of her own resentment boiling over day after day. "I don't know if I can change," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael turned to her, his blue eyes steady. "The fact that you're asking that question means you already have." The words caught her off guard, leaving her silent. She didn't know how to respond, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of something unfamiliar. Hope. As the bus pulled up to the stop, Michael stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Good night, Anna," he said, his tone warm but final. She watched him board the bus, her mind swirling with thoughts she couldn't quite articulate. As the bus pulled away, she remained on the bench, staring after it long after it disappeared into the night. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear. Michael had seen something in her that she hadn't yet seen in herself. And maybe, just maybe, he was right. The following day, Anna arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. The city streets were still quiet, and the faint pink of dawn crept over the skyline. She had barely slept, her mind replaying her conversation with Michael over and over. His words had settled in her chest, heavy and unshakable. She wasn't sure why she had come in early. It wasn't like there was extra work to do. But something about the stillness of the morning called to her, like a chance to reset. The restaurant was empty save for Eddie, who was wiping down tables with his usual nervous energy. He looked up, startled as she walked in. "Oh, hey, Anna. Didn't think anyone would be here this early." Anna offered a faint smile. "Figured I'd get a head start. You know, clean up the place before the rush." Eddie nodded, though he seemed surprised. Normally, Anna wasn't one for early mornings or unnecessary work. He hesitated for a moment before returning to his task, his movements clumsy but earnest. As Anna grabbed a rag and started wiping down the counter, she couldn't help but glance at Eddie. The memory of yesterday's incident with the broken glasses surfaced, along with the sharp tone she had taken with him. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, in the quiet of the empty restaurant, it felt like a stone in her stomach. "Hey, Eddie," she said after a moment, her voice softer than usual. Eddie looked up, his brow furrowing. "Yeah?" "About yesterday," she began, keeping her eyes on the counter as she scrubbed. I shouldn't have snapped at you. You were just trying to help and I made it worse." Eddie froze, clearly not expecting the apology. "Oh, it's fine," he stammered, waving a hand. "I mean, it was my fault. I should have been more careful." Anna shook her head, finally meeting his gaze. "No, it wasn't fine, and it wasn't your fault. Accidents happen. I was just being, well, a jerk." A flicker of surprise crossed Eddie's face, but then he smiled, a small, hesitant smile like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to. "Thanks, Anna. That means a lot." She nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief as she returned to her work. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the morning progressed, the usual bustle of the restaurant began to pick up. Customers filtered in, and the familiar rhythm of the day took hold. Anna found herself approaching her tasks with a new perspective. paying closer attention to her interactions with coworkers and customers alike. When Laura arrived, she noticed the difference immediately. "You're cheerful today," Laura said, raising an eyebrow as Anna delivered a coffee to a table with an actual smile. "Did something happen? Did you win the lottery or something?" Anna laughed softly, shaking her head. "Not exactly, just trying something new." Laura tilted her head, studying Anna with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Okay, who are you and what have you done with Anna?" "Ha ha," Anna said, rolling her eyes. But there was no bite in her tone, only a faint trace of amusement. Later that afternoon, as the lunch rush reached its peak, a small commotion erupted near the front of the restaurant. A young woman, clearly flustered, stood near the door with 2 children tugging at her coat. She was fumbling through her purse, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," the woman said, addressing the hostess. "I thought I had my wallet, but I—" She broke off, glancing at the children, who were looking up at her with wide, expectant eyes. The hostess looked unsure, glancing over her shoulder for guidance. Before anyone else could step in, Anna approached, her voice calm but firm. "It's okay," she said, addressing the woman. "Take a seat. We'll figure it out later." The woman's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you sure? I can come back." "It's fine," Anna said with a small smile. "The kids look hungry. Let's get them something to eat." The woman hesitated for a moment before nodding, her expression a mix of gratitude and relief. As she led her children to a table, Anna caught a glimpse of Eddie watching from across the room, his face lighting up with admiration. "That was nice of you," Laura said quietly, stepping up beside Anna. Anna shrugged, though she couldn't hide the faint warmth creeping into her cheeks. "It's just a meal. Besides, kindness costs nothing, right?" Laura blinked, startled by the words. "That doesn't sound like you." Anna glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Maybe I'm trying to change." Laura didn't respond immediately, but her expression softened. "Well," she said after a moment, "it looks good on you." As the day wound down and the restaurant emptied, Anna found herself glancing toward the window where Michael had sat just 2 days before. The stool was empty, but in her mind she could still see him there, his calm gaze and quiet presence like a reminder of everything she was trying to become. She didn't know if he would come back, or if she'd ever get the chance to thank him. But as she wiped down the tables one last time, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long while, a sense of purpose. Maybe change didn't happen all at once. Maybe it started with small, deliberate choices, and maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to make them. The following week passed in a blur of subtle shifts. Anna began noticing the little things she had ignored before, the tired looks on her coworkers' faces during the rush, the nervous energy of Eddie as he tried to keep up, the quiet frustration of customers who just wanted a little kindness with their meal. It wasn't that the work had changed. It was that Anna had changed. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying. On Thursday morning, as she restocked condiments at the counter, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, this place seems a little brighter." Anna froze, her heart skipping a beat. She turned slowly to find Michael standing near the door, his canvas bag slung over his shoulder and a faint smile playing on his lips. "You're back," she said, her voice betraying her surprise. She wasn't sure whether she felt relief, anxiety, or something else entirely. Michael nodded, stepping further into the restaurant. "I said I'd be in touch. Thought I'd check in, see how things are going." Anna straightened, brushing her hands on her apron. "Things are fine," she said cautiously, unsure how much to reveal. "We've been busy." "I can see that," Michael replied, his eyes scanning the room. "But that's not what I meant." His words hung in the air, and Anna felt a faint flush creep up her neck. "I've been trying," she admitted quietly, almost as if she were confessing a secret. "To be better. To change." Michael's expression softened, and he nodded. "I noticed." The simple acknowledgement hit Anna harder than she expected, filling her with a strange mix of pride and vulnerability. "It's not easy," she added, her voice faltering. "Some days it feels like I'm still just going through the motions." "That's normal," Michael said. "Change isn't a straight line. It's a process. The fact that you're trying means more than you think." Anna didn't respond right away, her mind turning over his words. Finally, she gestured toward an empty table. "Do you want to sit? I can get you some coffee." Michael smiled. "I'd like that." As Michael settled into the seat by the window, his usual spot, Anna brought over a steaming cup of coffee. She placed it in front of him, hesitating for a moment before sitting across from him. The restaurant wasn't busy yet, and for once she didn't feel the need to rush off. "So," she said, folding her hands on the table, "are you going to tell me why you were really here last time? Or are you just going to keep being mysterious?" Michael chuckled, his laugh soft but genuine. "Fair enough," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "I came to see if this place still had the heart it used to, if the people running it cared as much as the people who started it." Anna frowned. "What do you mean, the people who started it?" Michael leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the front of the restaurant. "This place wasn't always mine," he said. "It belonged to a family. They built it from the ground up, put their whole lives into it. I bought it from them when they couldn't keep it going anymore. But I promised myself I'd honor what they built, that it wouldn't just become another business." Anna's chest tightened as she listened. She thought of her parents and their small diner, the one that had crumbled under the weight of financial struggles and long hours. She thought of her father's tired smile, her mother's quiet determination, and the way it had all slipped through their fingers despite their best efforts. "That's why you were here," she said slowly. "You wanted to make sure we weren't ruining it." Michael's gaze returned to her, his expression unreadable. "Something like that." Anna looked down at her hands, her throat tightening. "I get it," she said quietly. "My parents used to own a diner. It was everything to them, but it didn't work out. They lost it, and I swore I'd never end up like them. But now, I think I lost something else along the way. I forgot why they loved it so much in the first place." Michael was silent for a moment, letting her words settle. "It's not too late to find it again," he said finally. "You're already starting." Anna looked up, meeting his steady gaze. For the first time, she didn't feel judged or scrutinized. She felt understood. The doorbell chimed, signaling a new customer. Anna stood, brushing her apron as she moved to the counter. "I should get back to work," she said, her tone lighter than before. "But thanks for coming back." Michael nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "I'm glad I did." As Anna returned to her duties, something shifted inside her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time she felt like she was heading in the right direction. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Michael watched her for a moment before turning back to his coffee, the faintest glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. The restaurant was still bustling, still imperfect, but it felt different now. It felt alive. The afternoon wore on and the restaurant filled with its usual mix of familiar faces and newcomers. Anna moved with a quiet focus, her interactions with customers noticeably different from just a week ago. Her smiles were genuine now, her tone warmer, and her patience, while not endless, stretched further than before. Michael sat by the window, his presence no longer an irritant, but a steady reminder of the changes she was working toward. He watched without intruding, sipping his coffee and occasionally jotting something in his notebook. Anna couldn't help but steal glances at him as she worked, wondering what he was writing, and if she was still part of the story he seemed to be crafting. Around mid-afternoon, a minor crisis unfolded at the register. A man in his early 40s, dressed in a rumpled suit and with dark circles under his eyes, was arguing with Eddie over the bill. "I'm telling you," the man said, his voice tight with frustration. "I ordered the lunch special, not the regular entree. That's $5 more." Eddie fumbled with the buttons on the register, his face turning red. I I'm sorry, sir. I think there might have been a mix-up. Let me try to fix it. Try harder, the man snapped. I don't have all day. From across the room, Anna noticed the exchange and walked over, her heart sinking as she saw Eddie's flustered expression. What's going on here? She asked, her voice calm but firm. The man turned to her, gesturing sharply toward the register. What's going on is that I'm being overcharged. Your guy here doesn't seem to know what he's doing. Anna placed a steadying hand on the counter. Let me take a look, she said. She moved beside Eddie, her presence instantly easing some of the tension in his shoulders. As she examined the receipt, she realized the man was right. The order had been entered incorrectly. You're right, she said, nodding. This was our mistake. I'll get it corrected right away. Eddie hesitated. I'm sorry. I thought It's okay, Anna said gently, placing a hand on his arm. Everyone makes mistakes. She corrected the bill quickly, apologizing to the man with a sincerity that even seemed to catch him off guard. We appreciate your patience, she said, handing him the new receipt. Your next coffee is on us. The man grumbled something under his breath but took the receipt and left without further argument. Eddie turned to her, his face a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. Thanks, Anna, he said quietly. I don't know why I keep messing up. You're doing fine, Eddie, Anna said, giving him a small but genuine smile. It takes time to get the hang of things. Trust me. I've made plenty of mistakes too. Eddie nodded, his expression brightening just a little. Anna returned to the floor, but as she passed Michael's table, she caught the faintest trace of a smile on his face. You handled that well, he said. Anna paused, turning to face him. It's part of the job. Michael raised an eyebrow. That's not how you saw it a week ago. His words stopped her in her tracks. She wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. A week ago, she might have snapped at Eddie or let the customer's frustration ruin her mood for the rest of the day. Instead, she felt calm, and it surprised her. Maybe I'm learning, she said quietly, meeting Michael's gaze. Maybe you are, he replied, his tone warm but thoughtful. But learning isn't just about what you do. It's also about why you do it. Anna tilted her head, intrigued. What do you mean? Michael leaned forward slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You can smile at a customer, smooth over a problem, and still feel resentful underneath it all. True change comes when the why matches the what, when you're not just acting differently, you're thinking differently. The words landed like a pebble in still water, rippling through her mind. She wanted to ask more, but a group of customers entered the restaurant, pulling her attention away. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly, and by the time the dinner crowd began trickling in, Anna found herself working harder to internalize Michael's advice. She didn't just go through the motions of kindness, she actively sought out moments to be present and engaged. When a family struggled with a fussy toddler, she offered a smile and brought over crayons and a blank sheet of paper. When an elderly couple debated over the menu, she took the time to explain the specials in detail, earning their appreciation. By the time the restaurant quieted again, Anna felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not just in her work, but in herself. As the evening shift wound down, Michael finally stood, preparing to leave. Anna noticed and approached his table, feeling a mix of nerves and gratitude. Leaving already? She asked. Michael nodded, slipping his notebook into his bag. It's been a long day. Well, thanks for everything, Anna said, hesitating slightly. I don't think I would have. She stopped, unsure how to finish the thought. Michael smiled gently, sparing her the effort. I didn't do anything. You did. And you're doing just fine, Anna. The words were simple, but they struck something deep within her. She nodded, a small tentative smile playing on her lips. Good night, Michael. Good night, he replied, his voice steady and kind. Then he stepped out into the cool night, leaving her standing in the quiet hum of the restaurant. For a moment, Anna stood there, staring at the door. The changes she had begun felt fragile, like a small flame flickering in the wind. but for the first time she believed she could keep it alive. All it would take was the same small, deliberate steps she had been taking all day. With a deep breath, she turned back to the empty tables, ready to finish her shift. Change, she realized, wasn't about a single moment. It was about the moments that came after, and she was ready to meet them head-on. The next morning, Anna woke up with a strange feeling, a mix of anticipation and resolve. She didn't know what the day would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt ready for it. The usual heaviness she carried into work had lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose she didn't fully understand yet but was eager to explore. As she walked into the restaurant, she was greeted by Eddie, who was already busy setting up tables. "Morning, Anna," he said brightly, his energy a little more confident than usual. "Morning, Eddie," she replied with a genuine smile. "You're early." He shrugged, a shy grin spreading across his face. "Just thought I'd get a head start. I've been trying to, do better." Anna paused, her chest tightening with a mix of pride and guilt. She hadn't realized how much her earlier criticism had weighed on him, or how much her recent change in attitude might have encouraged him. "Well, it shows," she said. "Keep it up." As the morning rush began, Anna found herself stepping into a new rhythm. It wasn't just about taking orders or clearing tables. It was about being present. She noticed things she'd overlooked before. The way regulars smiled when she remembered their usual orders. The way her co-workers' moods lifted when she offered small words of encouragement. Every interaction felt like a chance to make someone's day just a little better. Around midday, Laura approached her at the counter, a sly smile on her face. "Okay, seriously," she said, leaning in. "What's gotten into you? You're like a whole new person." Anna chuckled, shrugging as she refilled the coffee pot. "I don't know, I guess I just realized some things." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Did Michael say something to you? Because ever since he showed up, you've been acting different." Anna hesitated, her hand pausing over the coffee filter. She thought about everything Michael had said, the way he had challenged her without ever being confrontational, the way he had encouraged her without ever pushing too hard. "Yeah," she said finally. "He did. And I think he was right." Laura smirked. Wow, the great Anna admitting she was wrong. Must have been some conversation. Anna rolled her eyes, but there was no heat behind it. Don't get used to it. As the day wore on, the restaurant filled with its usual lunch crowd. Anna moved through the tables with ease, greeting regulars and welcoming new faces. She was clearing a table near the front when the door opened, and a familiar figure stepped inside. It wasn't Michael this time, but the man from the other day, the suited professional who had addressed Michael as Mr. Carter. He scanned the room briefly before spotting Anna and making his way toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite but businesslike. "Are you Anna?" She straightened, a flicker of nerves tightening in her chest. "Yes. Can I help you?" He extended a hand, his expression warm but professional. "I'm James. We met briefly the other day. Mr. Carter asked me to deliver something to you." Anna blinked, caught off guard. "To me? Why?" James smiled faintly, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a neatly wrapped envelope. "He said you'd understand." She took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. "Is he coming back?" James hesitated. "That's hard to say. Mr. Carter likes to keep his plans to himself. But he did say you'd find what you need in there." With that, he nodded politely and left, leaving Anna standing in the middle of the restaurant with the envelope clutched in her hands. Later, during a rare quiet moment, Anna slipped into the back office and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, Michael's familiar, looping script filling the page. Anna. Kindness doesn't always come naturally, especially when life feels like it's working against you. But what I've seen in you is more than kindness, it's potential. The way you've stepped up these past few days proves that you're capable of far more than you give yourself credit for. I've enclosed something that I think might help you continue down this path. It's not a reward. It's an investment. In you, in this restaurant, and in the people around you. Use it wisely. Best, Michael. Beneath the note was a check, made out to the restaurant. Anna's eyes widened as she read the amount, a figure far beyond anything she had ever imagined. Enough to cover repairs, upgrades, and even a raise for the staff. Her hands trembled as she stared at the check, her mind racing. This wasn't just money, it was trust. Michael had entrusted her with something huge, and the weight of that responsibility filled her with both fear and determination. She folded the note carefully and slipped it back into the envelope, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about everyone. The restaurant, her co-workers, and the customers who came here every day. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the office and back into the restaurant. There was work to be done, and for the first time she felt ready to take it on. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. This wasn't just her job anymore. It was her chance to build something that mattered, and she wasn't going to waste it. The next few days were unlike anything Anna had ever experienced. Armed with Michael's note and the check, she approached Laura and the rest of the staff with a newfound sense of purpose. They gathered in the quiet dining room before the restaurant opened, curiosity etched across their faces as they noticed the envelope in Anna's hands. "All right," Anna began, her voice steady but tinged with nervous energy. "I have something to share with you all." She unfolded Michael's letter, the words still carrying the same weight they had the first time she read them. As she read the note aloud, the room fell silent, the staff hanging on every word. When she reached the part about the check, a collective gasp rippled through the group. "Wait, how much?" Laura asked, her eyes wide. Anna revealed the amount, and the room erupted into murmurs of disbelief and excitement. Even Eddie, who usually stayed quiet in group settings, looked stunned. "So, what does this mean?" Eddie asked hesitantly. "What are we supposed to do with all that?" Anna looked at the faces around her, the weight of their trust settling heavily on her shoulders. "It means we have a chance to make this place better," she said. "Not just for the customers, but for us too. Repairs, better equipment, maybe even some training to make things easier on everyone." Laura crossed her arms, a small smile tugging at her lips. "All right, boss. What's the plan?" The word caught Anna off guard. Boss. She wasn't the owner and she wasn't in charge, but in that moment she realized something. Leadership wasn't about titles. It was about stepping up, taking responsibility, and making things happen. "Well," Anna said, her voice stronger now, "the first thing we're going to do is fix the kitchen. That stove has been on its last legs for months. And after that, we'll look at getting better chairs and tables. The ones we have now are falling apart." The group nodded, the excitement building. Eddie raised a hand timidly. "Can we, get more storage for the kitchen? It's always such a mess back there." Anna smiled. "Absolutely. That's a great idea." Laura leaned forward. "And maybe a bonus for the staff? Just saying." The group laughed, and Anna felt a swell of warmth. For the first time, she saw them not just as co-workers, but as a team, a group of people who cared about this place as much as she did. And for the first time, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. The changes began almost immediately. The stove was replaced within a week, followed by a long overdue deep clean of the kitchen. New tables and chairs arrived, brightening the dining room and giving the restaurant a fresh, welcoming feel. Anna even worked with a local artist to design a mural for one of the walls, a vibrant depiction of community and connection that reflected the spirit of the restaurant. But it wasn't just the physical changes that made a difference. Anna's leadership inspired the staff in ways she hadn't anticipated. Eddie became more confident in his role, no longer second-guessing himself with every task. Laura started mentoring the younger staff, sharing tips and tricks she had picked up over the years. Even the customers noticed the difference, complimenting the improved atmosphere and the genuine warmth of the team. One evening, as Anna was closing up, she found herself standing by the window, staring at the empty stool where Michael had sat so many times. The restaurant was quiet now, the hum of the kitchen replaced by the soft sound of the overhead lights. She wondered if he knew what an impact he had made, if he had any idea how much his trust had changed her life. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. She turned, expecting to see one of the staff who had forgotten something. Instead, it was Michael. He looked much the same as always, calm, collected, and just a little out of place in his simple clothes. But there was something different about his expression. It was softer, warmer, as though he already knew everything she was about to say. "Michael," Anna said, her voice breaking into a smile. "You came back." He stepped inside, glancing around the transformed dining room. "I heard there were some changes," he said, his tone light. "Thought I'd see for myself." Anna gestured for him to sit, and he took his usual place by the window. She brought over 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him, a sense of déjà vu washing over her. Only this time the dynamic felt different. She wasn't defensive or guarded. She was proud. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "For everything. I don't think I would have, well, I don't think we would have done this without you." Michael shook his head. "I didn't do anything. You did. All I did was show you what was already there." Anna smiled, the truth of his words settling into her heart. "You're a hard person to figure out, you know that?" Michael chuckled. "I get that a lot." They talked for a while, the conversation flowing easily. Anna told him about the changes they had made, the ideas the team had come up with, and the way the staff had come together in a way she never thought possible. Michael listened, his eyes bright with quiet pride. As the night wore on, Michael stood to leave, his bag slung over his shoulder. "You've done something special here, Anna," he said. "Don't lose sight of that." "I won't," she promised. He gave her a small nod and turned to leave, but before he reached the door, Anna called out, "Will you come back? You know, check in on us?" Michael paused, glancing over his shoulder. "We'll see," he said with a faint smile. "But something tells me you'll be just fine." And with that, he was gone, leaving Anna standing in the quiet restaurant, her heart full and her resolve stronger than ever.